I made a video a few days ago talking about the builds that require RNG and the builds that don't require RNG. And in that video, I described the Executor as the king of builds that don't require RNG. And reason being is that he has some of the best collection of stats in the game, and those stats synergize perfectly with the weapons he's likely to find and the weapon that he starts off with. Like katanas get S scalings and dexterity and gain access to status effects while having good movesets. So pairing the Executor alongside relics that can add more status effects, some of which being guaranteed, he can be a very powerful character while being very easy to build around. Like, it can still benefit off certain RNG builds, like the Halo Scythe build for example. Like, it quite literally does the most damage with the Executor, and you can go that route if you wanted to, but there's nothing really better than guaranteed good damage. He's always going to be like a beginner-friendly character that I'd recommend just for that reason. Because all you have to do is just use your starting weapon for the entire game. And that's the exact reason why I put the Executor in at least the A tier and like never below number 5 in a ranking list. Like, yeah, he's not going to be as valuable to a team like the Iron Eye, who can do very similar things, but those very similar things require RNG, where this character does not. And since the latest update, he somehow got even better when it comes to the no RNG builds. The character skill that he has summons a katana, which is another weapon that he can start off with that is removed from your weapon slots. And now this weapon, which is known as the Cursed Blade, is like a top 5 weapon in this game. Like, before the updates, 90% of the Executor's strength came from his stats and the fact that he starts off with a katana, whereas for his set of skills, they were just far too weak. His passive is useless, although it is very good with the seppuku. His character skill just served as like nice utility to deflect certain attacks that were hard to dodge, but for the most part, the risk was just not worth the reward. And for his ultimate attack, although amazing in the base game, it suffered tremendously in Deep of Night as you're pretty much just a sitting duck in the ultimate, and the damage just wasn't really quite there in return. However, now as of patch 1.03.2, the Executor is a complete character. His passive is still the exact same, but who cares? The character skill and the ultimate art are both S tier in both game modes. Starting off with the changes to his ultimate, as this is a lot more simple, it got a damage boost. Twice. One that applies to all game modes, and another one specifically for Deep of Night. And this can make the damage of this ult be genuinely ridiculous. You can easily do like half of a field boss's health bar with just one ultimate, and a large majority of these field bosses can get infinitely stun locked by this ult too, like the Misbegotten, Zamor Knights, Tree Sentinels. None of them get a chance to fight back. Now against those bosses that cannot be staggered, it's going to be more risky, especially in Deep of Night, but what I like to do against these bosses, if I don't have the taking damage boost damage negation effect, is every single time that I use the ult, I immediately use the Claw skill, which does end the ultimate attack early, but it saves on ultimate charge. Now you might be wondering, but isn't that going to be missing out on a lot of damage? Like, is it actually worth it? Yes. Yes, it is. The Claw attack staggers enemies like other damaging ultimate attacks in the game. It gets the second most stance damage out of every single ult, and it gets the second most damage, period. Like, just on this one Claw attack. That's not including that it's a roaming ultimate that allows you to do more damage with the rest of the moveset. That's not including that it has insane maneuverability that lets you go from A to B quickly. Not including that it fully heals your health and your status effects, meaning that it can synergize perfectly with seppuku and that passive ability for over 60% more damage. Not even including that he has projectile attacks that go really far and can stun lock enemies, while being able to revive allies really well, and having the option to heal yourself and allies with a relic. Now it still has the downside of that you're still vulnerable throughout the animation, but since the update, you now take a lot less damage throughout this attack, making it be even more safe. Now it still has terrible hit detection, and you still can get stance broken out of it, so it's not flawless, but the ultimate as a whole is definitely S tier. But for the reason why people are probably here, the character skill, Cursed Sword or Suncatcher, whatever you want to call it, this received lots of great buffs. Like, this shit got buffed through the roof. The blocking and deflecting has way better guard boost, meaning that you can deflect long combos and hard hitting attacks without losing much stamina, which was much needed for Deep of Night. And even if you do run out of stamina on a deflect, you no longer get guard broken. The The deflect itself now does more stance damage, which every deflect does like rival that of a Great Hammer Light attack. Also, some relics like HP up from guarding and taking aggro also got buffed, which indirectly buffs this character skill. The health regen on the skill activation also got buffed, which I only really care to run that if it did come in combination with something else that was good. However, there are 3 specific buffs to this character skill that make it be S tier. Number 1, it now works with melee and skill attack power buffs. Number 2, the critical hit values have been dramatically increased. And number 3, the damage boost character relic now gives him a 35% damage boost and no longer drains health. But instead, it does make him take more damage, which it is 40% damage for 6 seconds after an attack. But at least you're going to be at full health, so you can benefit of things like attack power and damage negation at full HP. And 35% damage is just absurd. Like, this cursed sword already outdamaged things like the Moonveil katana, but now with this relic, it's going to be getting similar damage to like legendary greatswords while being a katana. Like, who cares that it doesn't get bleed? Like, this shit has insane DPS while consuming next to no stamina, while having the ability to deflect and doing this crazy ass critical hit damage, which I'm gonna get into that next. I think a stance breaking critical hits build is the strongest melee build in the entire game, for solo specifically. And this character can be one of the better ones at doing it. I do think a Fist Wilder build is probably the best one. However, the Executor build requires 0 RNG. But to first describe how ridiculous this buff is, the katana now gets a crit modifier of 125, which, if you don't know what that means, that's pretty much 25% more crit damage than a normal katana, and it can even rival things like the Misericord or the Executioner's Great Axe for really like good crit damaging weapons. But that's if you don't include the character relic. If you do include the character skill boosting relic, then it's just broken. For a comparison, this katana at level 15 can get more damage on a riposte and a backstab compared to the Axe of Godfrey when being wielded by the Raider. Like, that is just stupid. And have this paired alongside 7 critical hit buff relics and try and find some critical hit buffs in-game, and your damage can look like this. Also, if you manage to find something like the Morgoth's Cursed Sword or the Grafted Dragon, then yeah, that's even better. Now, I don't care for this build much in teams, as you can't be the one to guarantee the critical hit, and enemies get more poison teams, and if most of your poise damage is coming from deflecting, you also can't guarantee to be the one to take aggro the entire time, even with the relic. But the critical hit buff is still something that you're going to benefit off greatly, because any single time that you have an opportunity to critical hit, you can just switch to this katana, which will always be on you. Like, the only downside of the crit build in solo is when you're fighting enemies that can't be critical hits, but that's why I always recommend having at least one balancer relic equipped for those circumstances. Because yeah, melee and skill attack power now both work with the skill. And double balancer build with the damage boosting character relic and some physical attack up relics, which yes, every attack on this weapon is pure physical damage, you can be outputting more DPS than any other dexterity weapon. And it's a weapon that you're always going to have on you from the very beginning. It doesn't even take up a weapon slot, it consumes no stamina, can deflect, like, you get the idea. But I do think this build is probably his best one, not only because of the good DPS, but also the skill damage. When you deflect 4 times, you can unlock your sword and gain access to this high damaging skill attack that can be boosted by skill attack power. And for a damage comparison, so you guys can actually understand what's going on here, if you have the character skill relic and nothing else, this can outdamage the Wilder when using the Blasphemous Blade skill, Ruin's Greatsword skill, Cranial Vessel Candlestand skill, Sword of Night and Flame, and it basically gets just as much damage as the Starscourge Greatsword skill. And this thing consumes no FP, like, it's just silly. Now, it is balanced on the fact that you have to deflect first and maybe use like the damage boosting relic just to get there, so it is very risky. But speaking of balance, the red balancer relic also has the occasionally nullified effects when debuffed, and this damage relic pretty much always has you debuffed. So 20% of the time, you're just not going to be taking any damage. So this relic was pretty much made for this build. Now, there is going to be an obvious weakness to this build in that you can't guarantee enemy aggro, nor can you guarantee that the enemies will attack lots of times, so you can actually spam this high damaging skill. And one thing that I've noticed with this skill is that it can miss a whole bunch. So it can be pretty frustrating when you're fighting these enemies that spam AoEs, you're not getting many deflects off, you're not getting your chances to use the skill because they're moving around a whole bunch. But there are basically no flaws in this build at all. And the reason being is because you have balancer relics and physical attack up relics. This is pretty much the exact same thing as the double balancer and successive attack relic build and trying to find the Rivers of Blood or maybe the Moonveil Katana. And even if you don't find those, you at least have Unsheath. Like you're always going to have access to good damage. And also sacrificing the successive attack relic to run the character skill boosting relic isn't even that big of a deal now as it has been nerfed, although it is still pretty good. But when this build peaks is when you end up finding the Rivers of Blood, which does mainly do physical damage. Also with the physical attack up relics, your ultimate attack will hit harder too. But also with your skill attack up buffs that you have, all you have to do is just keep deflecting when you have your chances to, and then in between while you're waiting to have your Cursed Sword buff get activated, just spam Rivers of Blood. And then when it gets activated, you switch and then rinse and repeat. Or you can just like cut out all that fancy deflecting shit and then spam Rivers of Blood the entire time. That's how I beat Depth 5 Everdark Balancers on one of my runs. Didn't even run away or cheese them, just like stood there and spammed. Like Rivers of Blood is fucking broken with this build. But I can't talk about the skill without talking about guard counters. Because any type of blocking based playstyle in Elden Ring or Night Rain should be utilizing guard counters. Now I don't recommend having it as a build and like actually dedicating relics behind it, because there's lots of larger enemies in this game that attack slowly, and the less enemies that attack, the less guard counter opportunities. Like it's much better against like smaller and quicker types of enemies. Also in trios, enemy aggro is going to be an issue, and also specifically for this character, the katana guard counter just isn't that good. It doesn't lunge very far, the motion values aren't high, the stance damage isn't the greatest, and it's not even that fast too. Like for a comparison, a great spear guard counter gets more range, gets more damage, more stance damage, does piercing damage, and is faster. Like if there was a charged guard counter added to this weapon, then I would consider it. But for solo, I'd rather have the critical hit build, and for trios, I'd rather have the skill-based build. But it still is worth doing the guard counters because it's the best attack to do after you block or deflect something and get an opening. Because these attacks do just as much damage and stance damage as a charged heavy attack while being faster. But the downside is that you have to block first. But speaking of downsides, this skill is not going to be exempt. The forced slow walk, that just sucks. It just does. The synergy with the walking buffs that it has is cool, but it's just not good enough for how many times that this thing can be frustrating. Like bringing out the Cursed Sword at a time where you need to like sprint away from something, instant death, trying to close in the gap with these larger bosses while they're moving all over the place is very frustrating. But I think the worst part about this skill is due to how inconsistent the blocking is in this game. Like some attacks feel like you should have blocked, like you're aiming in that direction, looking at it, you time it, and you should at least block the attack if you're not deflecting it, but it just like goes through and it hits you anyway. And like there are some like AoEs out there that are just like unblockable, and you also just have very little frames to deal with compared to just dodging. And also another downside that I didn't mention is that some harder hitting attacks can send you flying backwards even when you do deflect, and that can put you out of range of a guard counter. But one thing that you can do is like lock off when this happens or lock off beforehand and just redirect the backflip by aiming the other direction, and then you'll be in range of a guard counter. Like it's a bit tricky at first, but when you catch on, it'll be like peak Executor gaming. Also, some other tech that you can use is like deflecting with the sheath or unsheath animations, which the unsheath deflect can actually bypass this backflip animation too. Also, the Cursed Sword skill does get some deflecting frames. Like all this is very niche and a bit more challenging to pull off, but they can be very useful, especially when you do have like those skill-based builds that would require you to go back and forth between weapons. Which that basically just summarizes this Executor buff perfectly. Like he's now the ultimate high risk, high reward character. Like when the build doesn't work, it feels like shit, and trust me, there's nothing worse than getting one shot to an attack that you feel like you could have deflected. But when it works, you feel unstoppable and broken, and it feels like you're just doing so much more damage than everybody else. But the beauty about this character is that you don't have to play him this way. He still has those guaranteed, no RNG involved, very easy to use builds that don't require you to do this like whole deflecting based stuff. He just has much more build variety now and has a much higher skill ceiling. He's definitely going to be a character I play with a lot more because he's been very, very fun for me lately, but also been very, very frustrating. So Gotta get some more games in. But thank you everybody for watching. If you have your own opinions, let me know down in the comments below. Also do follow me on Twitch because I'm live there every single day doing some runs. And also if you do want to see the highlights of my runs, you can go check out my second channel that I do have called UE Extra. And also do join the Discord because I did actually recently make a co-op channel where people can like join each other and like communicate while they play the game. So if you're a person that hates playing with randoms, definitely join the Discord. And I'll catch you guys around. See yous.